Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Rocco, again, and this has been a long-awaited video for me. I was wondering when I would get around to covering these guys. Graaf Generator, not only one of the best prog bands, but honestly one of the best bands of all time. They would definitely be somewhere in my top 10 all-time favorite bands. But they're a band that I really seem to listen to in bursts. Like I never really go an extended period of time, like months or even years at this point, where it's part of my regular rotation. It's music where you have to be in the mood for, but when I get into it, I get so deeply involved in it, almost to the point of obsession. And I really think that they're a band that they're just phenomenal. They're one of the greatest bands of all time, as I already mentioned. So unique, so creative, so interesting. But again, you got to be in the mood for them because their music is just so insane, so dark and unsettling at points, and just so over the top that it's not something that you could really bombard yourself with on a daily basis. But not only that, these guys, they destroy me, guys. Let me tell you. The lyrics and vocals of Peter Hamill, they stir these emotions within me that kind of just overwhelm me at points. And that's just not something I want to feel on a day-to-day basis. But right now, I'm getting into my, sometimes it's like 2 times a year, sometimes 3 times a year, Graaf Generator kick or marathon, whatever you want to call it. So hopefully in the next few weeks, I'll be bringing you guys a lot of Graaf Generator reviews. I might space them out, or I might record them all this week, and then kind of intersperse them with other reviews I have stored just to keep keep it fresh, keep it changing. But we'll see what happens. But yeah, guys, Graaf Generator, one of those prog bands that really seems to slip under the radar for like the casual progressive rock fan. Sure, everyone knows Yes, everyone knows Genesis, Jethro Tull, King Crimson. But not a lot of people seem to really know about Graaf Generator, unless you're a hardcore progressive rock fan. And I hope I could, change that at least a little bit. Maybe, I would consider this video a success, even if I got like 2 people into Graaf Generator, because I'm just so passionate about them, and I think they really have one of the strongest discographies, one of the most unique, so much to offer, and really you can't get this anywhere else. I'd say the closest you can get to them, and not even, is probably King Crimson, but again, that's a stretch. And the reason I make that comparison is because both bands really have this element of heaviness in their music, this element of darkness. They both incorporate some jazzy themes into their music, some dissonance, some atonal things. But again, very, very different bands. Graaf Generator is definitely more focused on the vocals, whereas King Crimson really dives deep into the instrumental complexity and instrumental sections. This band here is definitely more grounded in the human condition than King Crimson. But they're both fantastic bands. Right now, if I had to compare them, I would say I like Graaf Generator more than King Crimson, but I listen to them a lot less than King Crimson, because King Crimson really fits every mood that you can possibly be in. Graaf Generator is definitely more, just strikes at your very soul, but definitely one of the greatest progressive rock bands of all time. Right, I would put them right up there with Genesis and Yes as probably my top 3 prog bands, not including bands like Rush, which I consider more, like, they're definitely prog, but I consider them more, like heavy prog or things like that. Out of the classic progressive bands, they definitely belong up there. And again, they just have one of the strongest discographies. And again, those emotions I feel when I listen to this band, no one else really does that to me. No other band really stirs up these like primal human emotions that Graaf Generator does. And yeah, just a very passionate. I'm very, very passionate about these guys, so excuse me if I kind of go off into fanboy territory. I'm going to try to be objective, but really, it's going to be tough. And, today I decided to review From H to He, or sorry, I'm pronouncing that wrong. It's From H to He, as in helium, Who Am the Only One. A very bizarre song title, I mean album title, but I'll explain it later. It actually kind of makes sense. And this was their 3rd album, their 2nd true album, I would say, by Graaf Generator, released in '71, and I decided to review this one first because this is the album that got me into the band. And yeah, I think it's a good one to start with because I think it really encompasses everything Graaf Generator stood for, and it has a few more accessible tracks. And I say that, take that with a grain of salt, because they're a very unaccessible band. They're kind of famous for that. But yeah, it has a few songs that are a little bit easier to get into compared to what came after this. So I think it's a pretty good album to start with. But again, some very, very dense songs on side 2 that might scare you off on first listen. They sure scared me off. But I would say not as crazy as the next album, Pawn Hearts, and not as heavy and that's debatable, but not as jarring as the album after, God Bluff. So I really think this is a good place to start, or at least maybe the album before it. The Least We Can Do Is Wave to Each Other, which is definitely a more accessible album than this one, but and still a great album. Don't get me wrong, I love that album, but I think this one is a little bit better written than that one, and just has those wow factor moments that might be a little bit lacking on that first album there. So just I would definitely start off with this one, but either one is good to start off with, so totally up to you. And I'll never forget, guys, when I first got into this album, the first song I heard, obviously being the opening track, was Killers, and that song there just piqued my interest at a very impressionable age. I think it was around 2017, right when I had gotten into King Crimson, and I was starting to dive into more adventurous music, and that song there just absolutely crushed me with its heaviness, catchiness, and it was surprisingly melodic as well. And I loved it, and I just kept listening to the whole album. And again, when I got to like the last two songs, they were a little bit too dense, a little bit too out there for me, especially the track Pioneers Oversea. But with repeated listens, I really grew to appreciate them. And that's the thing about this band, like, even though you don't really get it at first, and it might seem a little bit off-putting, like, you keep trying because there's that undescribable thing that just keeps you coming back to the music and wanting to get into it. Again, if something was just shit or just completely pretentious or inaccessible, you wouldn't even want to come back to it. But Graaf Generator is different. There's something about it that keeps you coming back. And they're notorious for this. They're notorious for not being liked on the first listen. But after multiple listens, they become one of your favorite bands. So trust me, guys, if you listen to this album and you're a prog fan and it doesn't grab you on the first listen, don't give up. Just go do something else, listen to other music, and then keep coming back to it, keep trying, well, within a reasonable amount of time. Like, I'd say, on the fifth listen, if it's still doing nothing for you, then maybe it's just not for you. But definitely on the first, second, or third listen, it's going to take time to develop. And the same thing happened to me. Then I got into Pawn Hearts after this, and that album just blew my mind as well. Went through the same process. But then once I got through Pawn Hearts, the rest of their discography was just so easy for me to love and get into. Maybe with the exception of Still Life, that album there takes a lot of concentration, and it's ultimately my favorite album by the band. But overall, I think once you can crack into Pawn Hearts, you'll get this whole band's discography, and this is kind of like the stepping stone to listening to Pawn Hearts. So a very impactful album for me, and I'll never forget, I was doing my CPR training at the time, and during the break, everyone already had their own groups to eat lunch with and things, and I was just on my own. And it was an hour-long break, so it was the perfect opportunity to listen to this album. And fuck, I don't regret not making friends during that CPR course, because this album was so much better. And I really mean that. Not to come across as an antisocial person. I have plenty of tight friends, but at that time, that album hit me in the right moment at the right time. So, excellent album. So without further ado, guys, let's get into the interesting history behind this. And then we'll talk about the album overall. All right, guys, so just a little bit of history behind Graaf Generator before we get into the specifics behind this album, because a lot of interesting stuff happened before the making of this that was instrumental to their kind of history. And again, them not being a very well-known band, relatively speaking, I think more people should know about their background, because it is pretty intriguing, to say the least. So yeah, Graaf Generator, these guys here, I always consider them to be like the second progressive rock band, right after King Crimson, because these guys here, right off the bat, in 1970, with their album, The Least We Can Do to Wave to Each Other, these guys just went for it. They went 100% into prog rock, and whereas bands like Genesis, Yes, Jethro Tull, sure, they'd been around, some of them had been around even before Graaf Generator, but they were just starting to dip their feet into progressive rock waters, whereas Graaf Generator was diving headfirst, as well as King Crimson, obviously, with their amazing debut album in '69. So really the second progressive rock band. And they actually formed in '67, completely different lineup than what would appear on this album, but basically formed by Peter Hamill, kind of the mastermind, the genius behind the whole band, and not to single him out as the only creative force, because it was a very collaborative process, but this guy here really was kind of like the heart and soul of the band. And again, he was such a prolific songwriter, and that's what makes them unique. I mean, if you look at all these prog bands, sure, you have fantastic songwriters within the confines of the band, but Peter Hamill was just a songwriter right from day one. I think from age 12, he was already writing songs. And you could just, all you have to do is just look at this guy's solo discography, which is fantastic, by the way, just to see how fucking prolific he was. I mean, songs were just flowing out of this guy like milk and honey. And yeah, so he formed the band with this guy, Chris Smith, or Judge Smith, or something like that. And they ended up getting a record deal. They put out a few demos, but the other members of the band weren't into it. You know, they were still in university at the time. They didn't know if they wanted to go pro. So they left the band. And Judge Smith and Peter Hamill went off to London to make some recordings. They recruited Guy Evans on drums. Hugh Banton came first, who's their longtime organist, appears on From H to HE. And then later on, Guy Evans as well as like a few other members as well. And they went into the studio to record an album. But at this point, they had been recruited by Tony Stratton Smith, who's famous for being the manager of Genesis and the creator of Charisma Records. And he signed them, like, at the time he was managing them, and Charisma Records wasn't a thing yet. So he signed them to Polydor Records, and that kind of conflicted with an earlier contract they had with Mercury Records. So, you know, there's all this kind of politics I'm not going to bore you guys with, but to make a long story short, the band kind of broke up. They had their fucking musical equipment stolen, and it didn't really work out. It wasn't really working out very well. Mercury was blocking them from making records. And again, the other members of the band hadn't signed to that record deal, and Tony Stratton Smith was kind of pressuring them not to because it was a shit deal. So they couldn't really record an album at that point with the Mercury record label. So all this shit kind of prompted Chris Judge Smith to leave the group, and really all that was left of the original Graaf Generator was Peter Hamill. So, you know, he went into the studio and he started recording, again, with Guy Evans on drums and Hugh Banton on organ, kind of acting as his backup session band. And then halfway through, they decided to just, you know, just to get out of that obligation with Mercury Records, just to call the album Graaf Generator, when in reality, it was a Peter Hamill solo album. There was very little collaboration. But they ended up reforming anyway, so they released that album, and again, a lot of people don't really consider it the debut of Graaf, because again, it was a Peter Hamill solo album, and it has a vastly different sound than the rest of Graaf Generator, more psychedelic and things, and, you know, it's an okay album. It's kind of like a take it or leave it kind of thing. But the real action started when they got David Jackson into the band, their saxophone player, and really the member of the band that gives them their, other than Peter Hamill's lyrics and vocals, gives them that unique quality that no other band really had at the time. And I forgot to mention, they also acquired bassist Nick Potter along the way. But when David Jackson came into the band, that was a big turning point for them. Because really, up till that point, it was just Peter Hamill on vocals, Guy Evans on drums, Hugh Banton on organ, and really Hugh Banton was doing most of the work with the melodies and everything, and the whole musical landscape of the band. But they wanted to get a second major instrument into the band. And this is where it's unique, because there was very little guitar playing in Graaf. Peter Hamill played some acoustic here and there, but it wasn't really a major part of the sound. Really, the organ was leading the way. But rather than acquire a full-time electric guitarist, like honestly 99.99% of the other bands at the time, they decided to get a sax player. And that's where David Jackson comes in. Again, Peter Hamill saw him at a jazz festival, was really impressed. Recruited him to the band, and they welcomed him with open arms, and the band went off into the studio and recorded The Least We Can Do Is Wave to Each Other, which actually did pretty well. There was a single, Refugees, from that album that did pretty well. It went into the top 50 on the UK charts, and it got amazing reviews. So everything was going well for the band at this point. They had recovered from their equipment being stolen, I guess, financially. And they were starting to make waves, which is great because the music on that album is really dark and inaccessible. So it really goes to show just how open-minded people were back then, audiences and, you know, critics. Well, some critics, you know, when it came to metal, they were just universally hated. But it was just a great time to be a musician. Really, the creativity was just flowing like milk and honey. And one thing I forgot to mention is that album was released on Charisma Records. So at this point, Charisma Records was a thing, and it was one of the first bands. I think they were the first band that were signed to it. So them and Genesis, they ended up going on tour because, of course, Genesis was also managed by Tony Smith, and they were signed to Charisma. And they went on tour together, and it was a pretty well-received tour. So things were looking up for Graaf Generator, and they decided to go into the studio to record their next album, which ended up being From H to HE. The thing was, this album was kind of recorded sporadically. They were touring a lot, so whenever they can get some studio time, they would take advantage of that and just write and record a new track. So really, the album was recorded throughout like the later half of 1970. And yeah, so at this point, the band was getting a little bit more experimental. Again, they were already very experimental, and I should mention at this point, the unique sound of Vander Graaf Generator is really just an amalgamation of three really important things. Number one, Peter Hamel, his vocals. This guy here just sings with this manic intensity that no other singer could match. And another unique thing about his vocals is that he sings in a British accent. A lot of the other singers at the time were trying to emulate the American side of things, but Peter Hamel was just nothing like that. There was not one touch of blues in his vocals whatsoever, no sign of any Americanism, and his vocals are freaking dramatic. And here's the crux with this band. A lot of people can't get into the band because of Peter Hamel's overly dramatic vocals at points. I mean, sometimes he sounds absolutely insane. But that's what I love about this band. It gives that unique quality that not a lot of other bands had. And again, the fact that people were liking this shit at the time really goes to show how open-minded people were. So Peter Hamel's fantastic. His lyrics as well. Honestly, in progressive rock, he stands way above the rest. Well, maybe Peter Gabriel gives him a good run for his money as greatest lyricist of all time. Just how he deals with the human condition on his songs is incredible. Where other prog bands would deal with like fantasy themes, and there's nothing wrong with that. I love when Genesis dealt with all those fantastical kind of imaginative songs, but Peter Hamel really dives deep into the soul, into the human condition, giving it that personal touch that a lot of progressive rock bands didn't really have at the time. So that's the first piece of the block, other than the fact that he's an incredible songwriter and writes amazing melodies. And I'm giving him a lot of credit for his intensity, but the more melodic, beautiful side of his vocals are up there with the rest. I mean, this guy could literally bring you to the point of tears, one of the most emotional singers, and has a soft range to his voice as well. Let me just fix the camera. There we go. So yeah, that's the first piece of the puzzle. The second piece is Hugh Banton's incredible organ playing. He's primarily an organist, and man, what an organist this guy is. He sounds very pastoral, very church-like, I've heard that word used to describe his playing a lot. But yeah, he's a fantastic player, and his melodies really drive the songs, giving it this kind of sinister vibe at points with this heavy Hammond organ and Farfisa organ as well. And he was also an electronics whiz, so he modulated his organ to come up with all these crazy sounds. And not only that, he was a fantastic arranger as well. So he really had a knack for arranging the songs and coming up with these crazy kind of collages that the band would come up with. So Hugh Banton, incredible organist. Then finally we got David Jackson. This guy really is like the crux of Vander Graaf Generator. His saxophone playing is incredible. And again, they didn't hire this guy to just play sax solos here and there. He is just intrinsically integrated into the music, and he's a core part of that sound. And his playing, although it's jazzy at points, it's boisterous, it's violent, and it really has this sharp quality to it. I mean, his saxophone playing on Vander Graaf Generator's entire career is just so intense and really sharp as well. And the guy would fucking play two saxophones at the same time. I believe an alto and soprano sax, giving it this kind of, not symphonic feel, but this really, really heavy bombardment. And that's the thing about David Jackson. He really bombards you with the sax. This guy isn't apologizing at all. He's not subtle, although he can be at points. He's just really in your face, driving the intense nature of the music, and just one of the best sax players. And he does go off into like some sax solos once in a while, but never like jazz, like never like, with a backbeat and just this crazy freeform sax solo over it. It always has purpose to it, and very avant-garde player as well. I mean, it's hard to follow his playing sometimes, but it's absolutely incredible. And stir this into a mixing pot. Guy Evans, fantastic, jazzy, intricate drummer. Add a dash of heaviness, add a dash of insanity, intensity, and just music that just goes all over the place. And you got Vander Graaf Generator. So that's really their core sound. And that's one thing I really want you guys to get across. I mean, this band really was a melting pot. all the members really needed to be there to create Graaf Generator. It was a collaborative process. And, you might think that because Peter Hamill's such a strong songwriter, had the most prolific solo career, he composed the main themes of a lot of their tracks, or most of the tracks, that he was kind of the guy behind the scenes dictating things. But no, it was a very collaborative process. All the band members were contributing to the writing and arranging. And you could tell, because when you listen to Peter Hamill's solo career, sure, there are similarities here and there, but there's something about it. It doesn't have that Graaf Generator essence or magic. So, truly was a band. And, the fact that they've been together for all these years, and they've been on and off, they've been friends the whole time, just really shows that this isn't a dictatorship. So that's just one thing I want to get across to you guys. And yeah, it's just such a unique band. This band here really weren't afraid of diving into the dark, insane recesses of progressive rock. And some of their music is going to absolutely terrify you. I mean, some of it is just so heavy and unsettling and even disturbing at points that, you'd be hard-pressed to find a heavy metal band that was more sinister and disturbing like this. And that includes bands like Black Sabbath at the time. Well, you guys know me. I'm obsessed with Black Sabbath. They're one of the heaviest bands, but they're nowhere near as sinister and demented as Graaf Generator. So if you want something that'll just drive you off the wall, this is the music for you. But again, a lot of beautiful moments as well, and it's just an eccentric band too, very experimental. And I mentioned their music, just like King Crimson, has a lot of dissonance to it, a lot of time changes like most progressive rock bands, and a lot of abrupt tempo changes and abrupt transitions that are really jarring at first, but again, grow on you with repeated listens. So really, these are the core elements of the band. And again, you're going to notice one thing. I didn't mention that Nick Potter was a core element of the band. And although he's a great bass player, and here's what I was getting at before I went into this long tangent of describing the band's sound to you guys, is that Nick Potter was kind of growing disillusioned with their more experimental music. Even The Least We Can Do is Wave to Each Other. You could tell he's there. He has a pretty strong presence, but he's not really contributing anything like avant-garde to the music. And at this point, he was kind of feeling that, this band might not be the right band for him. So he actually left the band in the middle of the recording sessions. So a lot of the tracks on the album don't feature Nick Potter. The ones that do, you could tell he's there, like Killer and other tracks as well that I'm forgetting. But rather than recruit another bass player to finish off the album, Hugh Banton was actually inspired by Vincent Crane, the keyboard player of the band Atomic Rooster, who had been playing bass pedals and really doing everything at once. And he's like, if Vincent Crane could do that shit, why can't I? So Hugh Banton decided to play the bass pedals, and actually played the bass on the song Pioneers Oversea, like the actual bass guitar. And the rest was history. They never ended up recruiting a different bass player. So the band kind of just stayed as that kind of tight trio of Hugh Banton on organ, Peter Hamill, why am I blanking out, on obviously vocals, lyrics, and Guy Evans on drums, and Peter Jackson, what am I saying? So the quartet, that's what I'm trying to say, the quartet, not the trio. They would later become a trio in the late 2000s, but that's history for another time. So they finished off the album, released it, and it didn't do as well as their first album. There were no hit singles off it, like Refugees, but at this point they had started to develop a cult following. When they had been playing shows, it seemed like all the fans knew the tracks already. There were not really many like newcomers to the music at this point, so they had this really tight-knit fan base in England. But here's the thing, guys. They would go on to become huge, and here's where my Italian pride comes in fucking Italy. And again, in the early 70s, prog was a huge thing in Italy, and they embraced Graaf Generator with open arms. And it's funny to think that out of all the prog bands, Graaf were the biggest in Italy. I mean, even over Genesis was huge as well, but Graaf Generator were like superstars. And they ended up just touring Italy for I'd say a good 80% of their tour, because they were just so well loved there. And again, I don't know if that was after this tour or after the Pawn Hearts album, but one of those two tours, they made huge waves in Italy. So even though the album wasn't as commercially successful, and the music is probably the reason, it's just very, very inaccessible, as I mentioned, they had that cult fan base and that huge following in Italy. So awesome. And then the next album after this, they would go on to record probably one of their magnum opuses, Pawn Hearts, which is even denser than this album here. So definitely start off with From H to HE. The album cover, designed by Paul Whitehead. You guys probably know this guy from all of the fantastic covers he designed for Genesis, the Nursery Crime cover, Trespass, Foxtrot, but he also designed this one as well, and it's a pretty interesting album cover. Shows like the world. It was inspired by the track Pioneers Over Sea, a very sci-fi space-inspired track, and yeah, really cool. And the title of the album itself, I promised you I'd tell you what it meant. From H to HE means from hydrogen to helium, so it's a reference to fusion. So creating new atoms from other elementary particles, which is really kind of what Van der Graaf were doing. They were adventurous. They wanted to create new things. And so the title here is really fitting. But who am the only one? That part there, don't ask me. I have no fucking idea. But at least I know what the first half of it means, so great success. So yeah, guys, that's pretty much all I got to say about the album. Now let's dive into the overall review. I already kind of mentioned the overall sound, which really stays true to this album, so it's probably going to be a shorter review than usual. But let's get into that. So if you guys heard what I said earlier about the overall sound of Van der Graaf Generator, I don't really have much to add with this album, because this album here is just really the embodiment of that sound. Again, you got those blaring saxophone riffs by David Jackson, as well as his fantastic flute playing. That's something I might have forgot to mention. He was also an incredible flute player, and he makes perfect use of that on this album as well as other Van der Graaf albums. Peter Hamill's vocals just range in intensity from just beautiful, soft, melodic to over-the-top, insane, shrieking, passionate, dramatic wails. And yeah, Hugh Banton as well on the organ. What can you say about him? He's fantastic. And Robert Fripp from King Crimson makes an appearance on this album. It's a brief guitar solo at the end of The Emperor in His War Room, and it's just classic Fripp, unmistakable. Apparently, he was a fan of the band from their previous album. I keep forgetting the fucking name. But anyway, he was a fan of the band, and they wanted a nice guitar solo, so they recruited him to do some session work on the album. And he would later come back, do some stuff on Pawn Hearts as well. So yeah, you got a little bit of Robert Fripp guitar playing, some Peter Hamill acoustic playing on a lot of the tracks as well. But again, it doesn't really stand out as the main instrument. It's just there to add touches of color. And what I want to get across about this album is that it's definitely a concept album in the sense that, you know, a lot of the tracks are about loneliness and isolation. Actually, all five of the tracks are. Killers being about this kind of ocean-dwelling creature who lives alone and preys on unsuspecting fish that go by. The second song there, House with No Door, is a song about depression and loneliness, in my opinion. The Emperor in His War Room is about this guy, this fucking tyrant, who just sitting in his war room deciding on his next move, which country to invade next. So that can also be very lonely when you're at the top of the societal ladder like that. No one else that you can really associate with on a human level. Lost, that's just an amazing song, probably my favorite on the album. Just about lost love. And then Pioneers Over Sea, just a baffling song about these astral travelers that go over the speed of light and end up in a different dimension where time doesn't move at the same rate and they're just lost forever. So yeah, very, very isolating, dark album. And a very disturbing listen. But what I love about this album is the way it draws you in. Starting off with Killers and House with No Door. Killers being like this insanely heavy, but catchy, melodic, and even jazzy at points in opening track. One of their most iconic songs they would play pretty much at all their concerts. And then House with No Door, which is this awesome ballad that really kills me every single time. Reminiscent of Refugees from their previous album. It really draws you in. Again, there's a lot of experimental dissonant sections, but enough accessibility to make you want to stay for the rest. And then that's where shit hits the fan with Emperor in His War Room, Lost, and Pioneers Over Sea, which are kind of like the long epics of the album, ranging from 8 to 12 minutes in length. And that's where you really got to like sit down and do some thinking when you listen to the music. So I like how they kind of suck you in there. But yeah, other than that, don't really have much else to say about the album. Some awesome, quirky moments. No, not really any virtuoso moments. That's what I want to emphasize about this band. It never really wanders off into like insane solos that are just showing off their virtuosic capabilities. Everything that happens, even the insane, cacophonous, instrumental dissonant sections, which sound like they're just thrown out into the blue, they serve the song. They serve the atmosphere. And we'll get to that when I talk about the song Pioneers Over Sea, which makes perfect use of dissonance to evoke emotions, which is just really rare. Usually bands just throw stuff in just for the sake of being experimental, but with Van der Graaf Generator, it definitely suits the music and the intensity of the album. So yeah, definitely not an album you want to listen to every day of the week. But when you're in the mood for it, oh my god, it's an absolute masterpiece, one of the best. Not one even remotely above average song on the album. All the songs here are just stratospheric, excellent masterworks in my opinion. And yeah, just honestly a perfect prog album. Like, what can you say about it? I would put this up there with Foxtrot, with Lark's Tongues and Aspic by King Crimson, among the multitude of other amazing albums. I wouldn't really say it's as great as Close to the Edge or Relay or, something of that caliber, or Foxtrot for that matter, so I don't know why I said that. But it's definitely a great prog album, way above average, and I highly recommend it if you're feeling adventurous. So now let's look at this amazing album track by track. Kicking this bad boy off, we got the iconic track, Killer. And this song here is killer, let me tell you guys. This is probably one of Van der Graaf's most iconic songs, and probably the song you want to start off with, just to get an all-encompassing feel of what this band is all about. It's up-tempo, it's crazy, it's heavy, it's all over the place, and most importantly, it's catchy, it's melodic, and it has enough accessibility to really hook you in. And I just freaking love this song. It's such an anthem, and it's such a disturbing song. Again, I mentioned it's talking about this undersea creature, maybe like a shark or something, who just kills everything in sight. And there's this one verse that just sends shivers up and down my spine, where it says, "You can't have two killers living in the same pad." And when his mother knew that her day had come, she was really rather glad. So when the son kills the mother, she knew it was just part of the circle of life, and that really you can't live with anyone if you're a killer like this. And that's just a really dark and haunting part of the song. But musically, it's fantastic. And I love the arrangement in this track. I love how it's structured. I love how it reprises the main themes multiple times. And speaking of main themes, this track here has 3 main themes, which are all extremely strong and memorable and evoke different emotions. And one has this awesome groove to it. The other one has this kind of triumphant resolve to it. And the other one is just a crazy batshit intensity that you wouldn't expect any less of from Van der Graaf. So just an incredible song, and I just love the arrangement. Hugh Banton apparently was a strong arranger in the band, so he probably had a lot to do with that, but everyone's on top for him on the track. It opens up with this absolutely iconic David Jackson sax riff. I mean, probably the most iconic in probably his entire career, with the bow, bow, now. Now, you don't have to be a music aficionado to love that riff. It's just immediate, it's infectious, and you got the bass holding it down, and it has this awesome swing to it, like this jazzy kind of big band swing to it. But then when Peter Hamill comes in and the pianos come in as well in the background, and the organ and the bass, it has this funky groove to it. But then Peter Hamill's vocals go off into the stratosphere, mirroring that saxophone riff, and that's just a really powerful moment there, just so anthemic and so powerful, and I just love that shit right there. And then we get this little tension building section before going back and reprising the main theme. And it's really rather groovy. Like, you can like groove along to this. It's fucking heavy, it's awesome, and it has this kind of chugging vibe to it. But then before you know it, we get into the second major theme of the track, the we need love section. That's what I'm going to call it. And it's just really intense and really jarring at points. We got the heavy Hammond organ in the background, and it's just absolutely manic and intense, and it might drive you away at first, but keep listening and you'll realize that the song wouldn't be the same without this section. And then it resolves into the third major theme I was talking about, this triumphant organ / acoustic guitar riff, the dun, 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 and it's just so joyous and so uplifting, and coming after that crazy avant-garde distorted section there, it's awesome, and you really need that resolve to it. Then before you know it, we dive into another absolutely mad section with the crazy organ and sharp dissonant piano in the background, played by Peter Hamill, and the sax just going nuts in the background with this freeform kind of nightmarish section. Then again, that triumphant riff comes in, resolving the tension, before we get into the we need love section. But this time it's different. There's a violent, absolutely sharp, acidic David Jackson solo. Just one of the most intense sax solos you ever heard in your life. And it's so wild and violent and distorted. And that's another thing. David Jackson would feed his sax through all these distortion pedals and things. So this guy here was literally like the Jimi Hendrix of sax playing. Not jazzy as well. It's very freeform, but it's not jazzy. I mean, this is just sax coming from a different dimension. And again, the tension he builds with that solo is insane. And you, this guy really means business. Then it reprises the triumphant theme again before getting into the third verse. And I love the acoustic guitar during the verses. It gives it that kind of pastoral feel. And again, that acoustic guitar is provided by Peter Hamill. And then it ends off, again, reprising the crazy We Need Love section. And this time the whole band's coming in. And I forgot to mention, earlier on in the track, the We Need Love section, the lyrics during that section are death in the sea, death in the sea. But later on, ending off the track, we get the we need love, we need... So just a different lyrical interpretation of that theme, but in case you were confused, that's what I was referring to. And I love the haunting backing vocals there, and there's a freak out at the end. Oh man, I freaking love Killers. It's one of my favorites. Easily a 9.5 to a 10 out of 10. It's just an immediate track. You guys gotta hear it. Coming in at track 2, guys, we got House with No Door. And this song here is one of those Graaf Generator songs that I mentioned earlier that totally fucks me up. I mean, this song just hits me at a level that I can't even begin to understand. It just hits at the very core of my essence. And, not to sound like overly dramatic, but I literally get goosebumps every time I hear the song. It's just so passionate, so emotional, and it just proves why Peter Hamill is just one of the greatest lyricists of all time. Now, my interpretation of the track is that this song is describing what you feel during like the deepest depressions. And I haven't had I don't have clinical depression or anything like that, but just listening to it, you could really empathize and sympathize with people that do, because just the beautiful imagery that he evokes, or not beautiful, but the despair that Peter Hamill evokes with his lyrics is absolutely incredible on this song. Using a house with no door and the rain coming in and the barren landscape just to paint this picture of just desperation, loneliness, and just apathy that I'm sure a lot of people that struggle with depression go through. And it's just such an emotional song. His vocal performance is absolutely incredible. And it never really goes off into weird experimental territory. It's just this amazing 6-minute emotional ballad that just, again, this isn't a song I could listen to every day of the week. This is a song that, when you're in the mood for it, it's absolutely amazing. And really, I think this has got to be one of my all-time favorite ballads of all time. Especially in the progressive rock genre. No other progressive rock band really hits at an emotional level like this, because House with No Door is a fucking masterpiece. It's basically driven by the piano and David Jackson's flute that would come in later on in the track, but it creates this beautiful, serene melody opening up the song. And Peter Hamill's actually playing the piano here. This is a very, singer-songwriter kind of track, kind of like Refugees on the first album. But then again, Peter Hamill's a singer-songwriter who just ended up finding himself in this crazy prog band. So this is kind of his own individuality coming through. It's not really a crazy collaboration, but the other members of the band do a fantastic job. I freaking love when his vocals just swell up and it picks up tempo. And he says, I know you, I don't know you, you say you know me. That line right there. And then when he hits that falsetto note at the end and it just hangs there for a bit, it's incredible. Anyone who doubts Peter Hamill's vocal capabilities, listen to House with No Door. He's absolutely one of the best singers of all time, and I really mean that. And not just from his uniqueness, because of the actual quality of his vocals on this track. It's just an incredible spine-chilling song. And the bass playing by Hugh Banton, of all people, the organist. So the song was recorded after Nick Potter left the band. Really grounds the song and does some fantastic work. But really, for me, the highlight of the track, other than the vocals, is when David Jackson's amazing flute solo comes in. And it's just absolutely serene, absolutely beautiful. And then later on it intensifies. The sax comes in for a bit. And it really joins forces with the flute to create this powerful climax. Just so climactic. Absolutely wonderful. Then the chorus comes in again and we get that falsetto and a beautiful piano melody kind of closing out the track. It's just absolutely just genius. It's a genius song. And this one here isn't hard to get into. I'm sure anyone can. But get ready for the waterworks, guys, because this song just tugs at my very soul. House with No Door, it's got to be a 10 out of 10. And, I've heard a lot of people say this is the weakest song on the album, and I completely disagree with that. Again, all 5 songs are masterpieces, but there's no way this is the weakest song for me. I mean, no song that makes you feel like this can be the weakest track on the album. So, House of No Door, needless to say, one of my favorites, and one of the major highlights in Vandergraaf's entire discography. Gotta hear this one, guys. This next track here, guys, closing out side one, we got Emperor in his War Room. This track here is just the embodiment of darkness. This is a very, very dark, haunting, and atmospheric song with a lot of like up tempo and intense sections, but for the most part, it's this atmospheric, flute-driven track that's absolutely dripping in melancholy, absolutely dripping in darkness, and it's just a really, really strange song. In a good way, though. It's awesome. And, compared to a lot of the later Graaf Generator songs and even the last two on the album, this song here doesn't go through as many changes. It really just stays within the same mood. And when it does go into changes, it often reprises the main themes of the track multiple times to keep you engaged and everything. So this song here, it's kind of a bridge between the more accessible first half of the album and the second half, which is coming up soon. But yeah, Emperor in his War Room, classic track. Again, exploring the themes of isolation, really delving into the mind of a dictator, an emperor, really plotting on, who to destroy next, but really having second thoughts and conflicting feelings about it, which is what I really love, again, about Peter Hammill. Best fucking lyricist ever. I mean, it would have been so easy to make a prog epic about this evil emperor, but he adds a touch of humanity there by making him second guess his thoughts and giving it this kind of depressing nature, like this emperor's at the end of his days, and he doesn't know what he's doing anymore, and he's kind of regretting all the mistakes he made in the past, all the genocides, and it doesn't explicitly say that, but this is what I get from the lyrics. So really, not a one-dimensional song lyrically, like quite complex, and yeah, it's a great song. Again, I mentioned it starts off with this melancholic flute-driven theme, and it's very haunting, and Peter Hamill's voice is processed under this echo effect, giving it this ghastly vibe. But then it picks up with the organ and the flute kind of joining, but those sections kind of divide the main verses, but it always comes crashing back to that depressing, almost lethargic sounding vocal performance by Peter Hammill. Absolutely dark. But then before you know it, we get into this intense, more upbeat section with the organ riff, and it sounds like a fucking descent into hell. And right when the tension builds to a climax, it crashes with these angelic vocals, and then goes back to the main theme. So then after a bit of that, for about, 4 or 5 minutes, it really takes its time, lets it breathe and develop. It gets back to that intense section, but here, rather than the flute, David Jackson's breaking out the sax, giving it an even heavier feel. And then this time we have vocals with Peter Hammill singing, "Savior of the fallen, protector of the weak," and some awesome drum fills in the background. Really cool stuff. And some really disturbing lyrics. I mean, there's this one line where he says, "Go steal the eye from your socket." Like, just get that imagery in your head. It's just absolutely disturbing. Then, at the 5-minute mark, we get one of the most abrupt transitions. And this part's awesome, where we get this awesome groovy bass line from Nick Potter just driving the entire thing. And then out of nowhere, Robert Fripp from King Crimson comes in with an awesome atonal guitar solo. Very, if you like the song 21st Century Schizoid Man, very similar to a solo on that track. And it's awesome. It fits the music perfectly. It has this kind of dreamy, nightmarish kind of atmosphere to it. And I love the pounding bass rhythm and busy drumming in the background, acting as the foil to that Robert Fripp guitar playing. And the vocals as well, the upbeat, "Live by sword and you shall die too." It's just a nice switch up in the middle of the track, and but before you know it, at the 6-minute 30-second mark, it kind of just reprises what was going on in the first 5 minutes of the song. So just this nice, like, rocking atonal guitar solo in the middle of this, melancholic, slow-paced song. Really cool change up there, and Fripp gives an awesome performance. Apparently, he just came in, laid this shit down on his first try, and the rest was history. So awesome guitar solo, and again, on an album that features very little guitar. It's a nice change of pace here. So yeah, Emperor in his War Room, it's an awesome song, easily a 9.5 out of 10. If I had to pick my least favorite track on this album, like, I would hate to say it, but it will probably be this one. I know it's going to upset a lot of people. It's a fan favorite. But again, you got to remember, all the songs on this album are masterpieces. So it's like choosing your favorite children. So onward with side 2. Okay, guys, here it is. The first song on infamous side 2 of this album, the almost 12-minute long epic, Lost, and I'll be fucking damned, guys, if this isn't by far the best song on the album. I feel that this track here is not only the greatest song on From the H to HE, but honestly, and this is going to be a bold statement, one of the all-time best Graaf Generator songs. And it seems like, not a lot of people recognize it as such, so I don't know if it's just me, but whenever I see, like, top 5 lists, top 10 lists, this song here, usually it's like, if it's even on the list, it's near the bottom. But for me, this will be near the top. I mean, this rivals fucking Man Erg from Pawn Hearts and Plague of Lighthouse Keepers as like the upper echelon of Graaf Generator. And really, so much goes into this track. Again, at the end of the day, it's a love song, but only a love song like Graaf can do, talking about this lost relationship. And Peter Hamill, the first thing about this track is Peter Hamill's vocals are just absolutely passionate to the max. I mean, to the absolute maximum. His vocals just send shivers up your spine in the best possible way. I mean, the amount of emotion and drama he puts into this shit is second to none. One of his best vocal performances. But also the organ from Hugh Banton in the background, giving the song this backdrop, this really climactic, smoky atmosphere. And of course, David Jackson with the sax. We'll get into him. He does a lot on this track as well. But it's just such a great song, and the transitions are just seamless. Except for 2 transitions I'm going to talk about later on that are anything but seamless. But overall, this track here just changes moods just so gradually that you can't even pinpoint these amazing transitions. It's just incredible, and it just shows that the band were just so tight at this point. And again, 1970, so early in progressive rock's history, to come up with something this ahead of the game is honestly astounding. I love how the song starts off kind of like falsely with this melodic, jaunty flute line, and it's almost playful, and then Peter Hamill comes in kind of mirroring that. And at first I think this is going to be kind of an upbeat track, but then Hamill locks into this unison with the organ and the sax, and it goes from joyous to like climactic and melancholic, and you can't even pinpoint it. And his vocals get so passionate, and it just overwhelms you, especially when he sings, "I know I'll never dance." And again, I'm a horrible singer, but that part there just shivers up and down your spine. Then before you know it, that jaunty flute intro comes back in, and it kind of rinses and repeats. But at some points, Peter Hamill, the vocal inflections he puts on his vocals here, just sound absolutely tortured during these sections. Like, there's some parts where you can just feel the pain within. It's just amazing. And the saxophone swells at points with the organ, and I love that unison between the two. Now here's where the song gets crazy. And I said side 2 was going to get a bit crazy. At the 2-minute 30-second mark, we get this dissonant descent into madness driven by Hugh Banton's organ with this fucking doomy riff. And then all of a sudden, David Jackson's sax comes in, and again, it's fucking violent, dissonant, and it's just so demented and evil sounding. You get to this part, after that beautiful, melancholic Peter Hamill vocal climax, it's really strange, I'm not going to lie. It's a very jarring experience, and it just sounds like a mad circus, like an absolute descent into madness. But over time, and I don't know if this is just because I'm so used to the album by now, but when you expect it, it's less jarring, and it just becomes part of the song, and you just gotta love it. I don't know. That's just my opinion. But then it suddenly comes to a crash, and I love how Peter Hamill just slides his way back into the song with these understated vocals and the climactic organ, and he just builds and builds his vocals, and it just, again, just an overwhelming performance. So many vocal climaxes. Then we get into like kind of this nice like 3-minute chunk in the middle where we get the sax coming in, this jazzy, laid-back sax, and Peter Hamill comes in, and at points, again, he reaches incredible climaxes with his vocals, very operatic at points, but then it gets back into this smoky kind of chamber sax section, and then it eventually locks into this swinging groove with the it's just so great. Then it reprises the "I'll Never Dance" section, and immediately gets this really climactic part. Reprises the crazy jarring section I was talking about too, so you get that back with a lot more saxes this time. And again, with this fucking amazing outro. So, again, there's like fucking 10 climaxes in this track. That's why I love it. I love climaxes in music. And there's like some dissonant piano playing from Peter Hamill too in the background at the end there. Just so much stuff happens. It's an epic 12-minute song. The ending is just this doomy sax riff, and this freak out at the end is just It's just a flawless, powerful song. What else can I say about it? It's easily a 10 out of 10, hands down. Now, closing off the album, we get the 13-minute long epic Pioneers Oversea. And I'm not saying oversea as in over the seas, over the oceans. I'm saying oversea as in sea, the constant, the speed of light. That's right, guys. This is a song about space travel. I take it it's about these astronauts that somehow figure out how to travel faster than the speed of light, which is impossible, by the way, as we all know. But they do, and they end up in this weird kind of state of just disembodied, dismembered consciousness where time doesn't really pass at the same rate as everywhere else. And it's just this weird kind of dimension, and they're just lost. And the song really, it's a really expansive, really vast song that, really evokes a lot of these emotions of loneliness that, again, the whole album has that as its central theme. And this track here, if I had to pick a song that totally exemplified that, it would definitely be Pioneers Oversea. And it's just a really atmospheric track. Very, very hard to get into, guys. I gotta be honest. This was the Graaf Generator song from their first run of albums, their holy trinity of their first albums, that took me the longest to get into. Because it's just very freeform at points, very jarring, and the transitions kind of feel abrupt and, again, jarring at points. The flow isn't there. Like the song Lost, there's no flow whatsoever. And it totally makes sense because apparently the song was recorded in sections, and they just glued these sections together, which made it pretty much impossible to play live, according to the band. But, over time, with more and more listens, and this is kind of the theme of this entire review, it all comes together, it all falls into place, and a structure does emerge. And really, this track here, it's comprised of three main themes that kind of get reprised and repeated, and kind of this weird, spacey instrumental section in the middle. But really, there is a lot of rhyme and reason to it. It just takes multiple listens to appreciate. But yeah, really, really creepy track here. And I gotta just give a shout out to Hugh Banton on the bass on this track, again, taking over from Nick Potter, who left the band. His bass playing really drives like one of the main themes of the track, and it's really cool. So props to Hugh Banton. But yeah, everyone's on fire on this track. It just starts off with this atmospheric intro that really builds to this organ riff, this very brooding organ riff, and it's very creepy. It's very expansive and melancholic. And then Peter Hamill comes in, and it gets into kind of the first theme of the track, which is kind of the main theme, to be honest. And yeah, it's really kind of spacey and atmospheric. But then all out of nowhere, we get that chunky bass line from Hugh Banton, the doo-doo, doo-doo, doo-doo. And it kind of locks into this cool groove, and it's just kind of unexpected after that kind of spacey atmospheric section. And the sax unites with it. Pretty cool stuff there. Pretty bouncy groove. And then before you know it, we get into the third theme of the track, which is my favorite. Just the most expansive section of the whole song. Feels like you're just drifting into space, floating into the very fringes of existence. And I guess that was the whole point. But yeah, it's awesome. We get this acoustic guitar and sax coming in. And it just sends, again, shivers up and down your spine. Peter Hamill's vocals are so soft and understated. I love that part. That part's amazing. It's so haunting. But then it abruptly just stops with this jarring riff. And then we get the next theme of the track, the triumphant part with the sax, the and Peter Hamill singing, "We are the last ones, we are the pioneers." And it's just a really uplifting part of the song that, really exemplifies the spirit of exploration that these astronauts must have been going through. And yeah, really cool. I love that part of the song there. Then it kind of repeats that whole structure again until we get into that spacey groove again. But this time, rather than the sax driving it, the organ is totally driving it, and it's just as atmospheric. But then the organ ends jarringly, but rather than repeating the same structure again, it gets into this weird, folky acoustic section. Again, very laid back and understated, and Peter Hamill's vocals just so soft and atmospheric here. And then all hell breaks loose at the 7-minute, 20-second mark. We get into this free-form sax solo, and I'm talking free-form. This is really the only part on the album where one instrument just comes through and just solos for a bit. And it doesn't last long, but literally all the other instruments stop, and we get this crazy free-form David Jackson sax solo. And it's just very choppy and cut and paste, but I guess that was the whole point. It creates this sense of tension, this sense of just aloneness, and if that's even a word. And Very creepy sax solo. Then we get into this kind of frantic experimental piano section. It's just very dark, very cold. Feels like you're fucking in the depths of space, which again was the whole point. Before coming back into like the main theme of the track and kind of repeating that structure there. And I love the lyrics on this track. I mean, there's some classic lines like only dimly aware of existence, and then only dimly existing awareness. That line there just kills me every single time. And then at the end, it seems like only one person of this original astronaut troop ended up surviving, and he's kind of just this disembodied spirit in the universe at this point. And yeah, it just ends with a freak out section with bombastic saxophone. It's just a very out there song, a song that, you know, has a lot of different parts, a lot of jarring transitions. But trust me, guys, with repeated listens, this song will reveal itself to you as one of the most atmospheric and spacey, dissonant Graaf Generator songs. And again, that sax solo in the middle and the piano dissonant section really give the song this unaccessibility where you really have to listen to it multiple times. But overall, I think it's a great song. I would give this a 9 to a 9.5 out of 10. It used to be my least favorite track for the longest time, but now it's kind of risen to the same level as Emperor and his War Room in terms of how much I enjoy it, and I now consider it an absolute classic. So definitely a track you guys have to work towards, but I trust you'll get into it. And that's it, guys. That closes out the album. So from H to HE, Who Am the Only One is a very classic Graaf Generator album. Side 1 is going to draw you in, but really side 2 is where it's at. This is where the experimentation come in. This is where the atmospheric dissonance comes in, and takes a little bit of time to work into, but I trust you guys. You guys are adventurous. You guys want to experiment. You guys want to get into this adventurous stuff. And that's why I'm here. I'm here to introduce you guys to this. And I'm here for you guys to introduce stuff to me. So down below, make your recommendations. You know, for me, it takes me a while to review albums. So I probably won't be reviewing your recommendation anytime soon because I got to absorb it and get into it. But I'll definitely write it on a long list of music I have to listen to that I kind of go through randomly sometimes and just tick off albums once in a blue moon. So feel free to do that. And stay tuned for more Graaf Generator reviews. They're definitely coming your way. Again, I mentioned when I get into my Graaf Generator marathons, I get really into the band, as you guys can already tell. Very passionate about these guys. So thank you again for watching. Truly appreciate it. And peace out. Rock on.